Hot on the shelves in terms of premium's hype is the one and only Luard together with the new Morfessa. Welcome folks, today's premium feature is going to be taking a look at Shadow Paladin's brand new shiny tool that is Morfessa. So this stride brings a lot to the game in terms of not just premium but also just the deck of Luard itself. So we're going to go with the usual structure as we have been going with so far. So we're going to go over the pros of the deck. First go over the skill of course, then go over the cons, then we're going to go over some combos, and then finally we're going to go over the counters that the deck has, and then finish up with an example deck list or two. So starting off we have Dragprincipal Morfessa. Once per turn act, you may counterblast 1 and flip a G unit face up and retire 2 rear guards to draw 2 cards, and until end of turn you regard trigger units in your drop zone as grade 1. Now this, first let's read through the skill, then we'll talk about the aspects. So second skill, Continuous Vanguard Circle Ritual 10. All of your front row units get plus 15k plus 1 crit. When your opponent would call cards from hand to Guardian Circle, they must call 2 or more at the same time, aka Battle Door effect. So this pair of skills is absolutely insane. It covers so many different grounds and it just works so well in the Luard deck. It's literally made perfectly for Luard, and it's just the perfect ritual card that's like super effective first stride, super effective second stride, which is overall an amazing card. So let's go over the pros. So first things first, this card in the deck itself has an insanely high ceiling. The potential of this deck is crazy. So like having in mind the fact that not only is it generating resources for you and giving you more like an easier time to create ritual counts, it's also giving this exceptional offensive boost in terms of like everything comes with a crit, everything comes with Battle Door effect. Like they have to G-guard it, and like even if they don't, then they have to drop like more than 2 cards, like 2 or more cards every single time, and so that's absolutely huge. This card, like, it makes it so that if you can build up that Ritual 10 efficiently by first stride, which is a very, like, it's a pretty hard task. You need to be a smart player to be able to do this quite efficiently, and then being able to do that by first stride and then trying to end the game there requires insanely high levels of play, and so the ceiling of this deck is just phenomenal. Another thing of the deck itself and why it is so good in this meta in general is that it has a really strong early game because of cards like Maka and Nemain. And you know, speaking of Nemain, Nemain has 2 optimal targets in this deck, the first one of which being the same as standard, which is the Swordbreaker, which can draw you extra cards in the early game and, you know, provide itself as like a sacrificial kind of body for your opponent to attack into if anything, but you know, keep in mind that that might lead to you being damage denied. However, the other target that's exclusive to premium is the Vicro. So this used to be a starter, but because, you know, it is a starter with 5k power, you can just run the normal full bow instead, and then just have Vicro in the main deck to be searched out with the Nemain for later turns when you need that counter charge in order to do an additional combo, or you need that extra soul for something else instead. The deck also has a bunch of CC options to balance the resources, so like I said, Vicro exists to provide that kind of CC, and then we also have Karen, which not only can be called, you know, via things like Maka, as I already mentioned earlier, but you can call her off of things like the Nawiz, etc., and off of the Cursed Eye Raven, because that also lets you call grade 1s. Even if it's in rest, you can still proc the Karen, so there comes even more counter charge. On top of that, when you do start to run out of pieces for your combos, or you need to recycle something specifically just to keep going for the next turn, Luard provides that recycle. He recycles your pieces so that you can keep those combos going for the next turn and make sure that you don't run out of your important key targets, whether it's, you know, whether it's Nawiz, whether it's the Dagda, like there's so many different targets that you can choose, and so the deck does that excellently, and that's why people have chosen to play just the regular trial deck Luard instead of the Dragfall as well. And on top of that, the big other pro of Morfessa on her own is that she suddenly rewards you for playing stands as well. Like before, people did play stands because Cursed Eye Raven is just a great card, but now like people are playing more and more. Like we've seen lists with 8 stands as well, just because Morfessa rewards that. If you can stand an attack that has a 15k boost and an extra crit, obviously that's going to be beneficial to you, and so it's obviously just a huge boost in terms of your aggressive plays as well. However, there are some cons we have to go over as well. So first things first, with a high ceiling, obviously the difficulty of the deck goes up dramatically. It's very difficult to play this deck efficiently. Like I tested it a few times myself, like a good dozen games, and then I talked to Solemn Vanguard just to like exchange some ideas, and some of the things he told me I was like, wait, I could have done that? And it's just like, it really requires you to know this deck inside out. Like some players, like Solemn Vanguard himself, has a whole algorithm created for the deck so that like every card connects in some kind of way. It feels like Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds with how you say like connects cards in his brain, but that's literally what this deck feels like, honestly. It's just a very difficult deck to play, and so you do need to practice a lot with it in order to play it very efficiently, and it can be quite straining in a long regional of like 9, 10, 11 rounds and stuff like that, including top cut, of course. The other big con is that it plays a lot of pre-V series triggers, so a lot of G era triggers. So a lot of your defensive triggers will only hit for that 5k extra power, a lot of your regular triggers only hit for that 5k extra power. You still play some V series triggers like the heals, but a lot of your trigger space is like, the Belial Owl is old, the Cursed Eye Raven is old. Like a lot of these triggers are old and will only be giving you an extra 5k boost. It does hurt at times. Sometimes you do need that full 10k trigger, and so unfortunately you can't give yourself that because the trigger skills are just too good to pass up, and you really do need them. The other thing is, I did mention that it has good early game, but in order to have that good early game, you must draw Nemain. Like if you do not draw Nemain in the early, you will have a terrible early game and you'll probably have to ride up just because it becomes a terrible matchup in that sense. Like it's just very hard, and like without, like Maka obviously also helps that too, but then the Nemain is the thing that really keeps the early game pushing. Like it's really what keeps you in the game to survive the early game against a lot of decks, and so not drawing into her is just crazy levels of bad. Another con is that fast decks like Azel might not even let you set up Ritual 10 efficiently. So if they rush you early, and obviously like you can already stride it up, by just writing up grade 3, you might have to minus yourself to some extent, or just do some plays that aren't as efficient as you'd like them to be, just because your opponent forced you into that situation. So sometimes you will have to write up, and you will have to actually like make some inconvenient plays here and there just to reach Ritual 10 and try to end the game there, so that can be a problem. Same goes for plants as well. And finally, one of the biggest combo makers of the deck, which is Dagda, has to be drawn into unless you run the Dark Metal Dragon, but that is a grade 3 that again you also basically have to draw into. Like there isn't a very consistent way to search him either, but I mean there are ways to make Dagda appear a bit more consistently, but it's still a card that has to be drawn into unless you search it with Dark Metal. Like it's just the state of this deck, and Dagda just expands the combos of this deck like crazy and puts the ceiling even higher. Alright, so now let's take a look at some combos. Apologies for the weird sound of my voice, I kind of lost it and I'm recording this separately from the original footage. So I'm going to go over, this is going to be a bit different from the Neonectar one, so it's not looking at the combo specifically, but more looking at the interactions that the cards have in the deck. Wow, my voice is really bad, I'm sorry. So, looking at the battle phase specifically, you have stuff, obviously Dagda is a big player, so Dagda into basically anything is already a combo extension that will have the extra power and the crit and the battle door effect that Morfessa gives you. You also have stuff like Dagda into Slaptail plus whatever else, that will obviously give you the extra attack and whatever else that Slaptail gets you, and that anything can be anything really from like Dialad or Swordbreaker if you want to draw more cards and stuff like that. So there's really a lot of different options you can pick and then just make good numbers based off of what you pick. Also even to stuff like Karen that we talked about earlier. A lot of the cards we already covered basically that you can have as solid picks. Now before the battle phase, there's some things that you can do before actually doing Morfessa. This is very reliant on Nawiz. So for example, this is something I got from Solemn Vanguard. You can use Nawiz into Belial Owl if you can, find it, and then if you have like 2 Belial Owls to retire both, you can then draw essentially a total of 4 cards, and that gives you more of a chance to draw into the Dagda for the battle phase. There's also Nawiz into Dialad or into Swordbreaker to again help you draw into more pieces if you don't find anything else. And finally Nawiz into something like Crow will give you more filtering, and also these stands will be recycled, so that overall is very good, because even if you do Nawiz into Crow, you get to put the stand back and then call something out of the Crow, so that definitely works very well. So that kind of wraps up the main interactions that you should know for the deck in terms of how to achieve the ceiling a bit better. And now it's time to take a look at the counters of this deck, and they definitely do exist. As we already mentioned, rush decks are not a favorite in terms of Luard's opponents. So Neo Nectar, definitely a tough matchup. They rush you, they have a great early game, their early game is better than you, and it's just a very, very tough matchup to beat. Same goes for Azel, because they can put you in that awkward situation where you don't even have Ritual 10 set up anywhere near close, and so that can pose a lot of issues in that sense, especially if they high roll super hard. So do keep that in mind. Finally, Gridora. Gridora, while quite a few decks can beat her, Luard struggles because the Gridora Stride blocks you essentially from doing anything, because everything in the deck superior calls in some kind of way, apart from the draw with Morfessa, I guess. But even then, like, you want to be using your Dagdas, you want to be using your Nawiz, your Cursed Raven, so many things superior call in this deck, it's crazy. And so not being able to use even like Luard's Stride skill just absolutely shuts this deck down. Like, losing the column isn't as bad. It's already bad because you only get one column that can attack for a 15k plus 1 crit, attack. But having that plus not being able to actually use the cards you want is pretty bad. The one nice thing though is that it is one of the very few clans that does hold the continuous G-Guard. So that way at least you have a relatively decent matchup against OTT, because not all of your G-Guards are shut down. So that's it for this kind of overview. Now let's take a look at the example list, and I'm sure not many of you are surprised because we are looking at Solemn's list. So I personally think this is honestly one of the best lists for Luard right now. I've seen some lists that run like an additional 2 stands just to completely profit off of Morfessa, but obviously that's more V triggers that you have to play, which can be more G triggers you have to play, which can be more of a problem as well. And the other thing is that I feel like the Nawiz is very essential, but I personally do like to also put in like one Slaptail because it is a target off of the Dagda, but keep in mind, you can damage check it, you can draw into it, suddenly it's not doing that much. So that's definitely something that needs to be kept in mind. It might not actually be worth that one deck slot, but I think that Solemn honestly built a really good Luard list, and it definitely deserves the praise that it gets. So that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was my kind of just quick look over Morfessa and what it can do. I hope I was fair to the deck as well. I feel like we went over its biggest strengths, its biggest weaknesses. The decks that really do counter it, and I think the combos are really interesting, like both in terms of Dagda, but also like to me one of the things I completely didn't think about much was like Nawiz into Belial, and then to retire both of the Belials off of the Morfessa. That's just huge, and that helps you draw into the Dagda too, and so that's just absolutely amazing. And so there's just a lot of stuff that the deck can do. The ceiling is absolutely ridiculously high, and so that's just amazing for people that want to play this kind of more difficult deck. So I want to give a big thank you to Solemn Vanguard. I mean, not only for topping with the deck, but he taught me a lot about the deck itself and a lot of the combos and what it can do, and then I did that in my own proxy testing. But there are some interactions like between like Nawiz finding more Belial Owls for you to like retire with your Morfessa and stuff like that, like things like that I didn't think about, and he actually checked with me like the things I'm talking about today to make sure that they're not like faulty. So big thank you to him for helping me out with this video. So that's gonna be it for me today. Do check out all the links in the description and hit that bell button, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.